Genesis 1, verses 9 and 10 indicates that when the earth was created, the waters were gathered into seas so the dry land could appear. Thus, the early earth was covered with an ocean of water, with dry land appearing later. 2 Peter 3, verses 5 and 6 says the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water, which, after many life forms had appeared, perished when the earth was again deluged with the waters of the great flood. So Genesis 1 and 7 and 8 and 2 Peter 3 are telling us that the early earth was first covered with an ocean of water, and after the continents were exposed and many life forms existed on them, there was a later flood of water, an extinction level event, which destroyed most of those life forms and, presumably, buried many of them in the sedimentary deposits on the continents that later hardened into rock. Hutton and Lyell's uniformitarian geology sought to discredit the Genesis flood by eliminating all catastrophic events from Earth history. To discredit the early water world of Genesis 1, verses 9 and 10, LaPlace and Kant concocted the Nebular Hypothesis. In their story, the early Earth began as a chunk thrown off of a swirling and cooling superhot gas cloud covered with a sea of molten magma, which took a long time to cool into solid crust and continents, so that it was a long time before water appeared in the form of warm, shallow seas. The early molten magma idea continues to be spread as one of the settled truths of Western science.
In the very beginning of Earth's history, this planet was a giant, red-hot, roiling, boiling sea of molten rock, a magma ocean. It is logical to assume that the Earth was completely molten, in effect a magma ocean, at one time early in its history. Researchers think the Earth's first millennia were spent covered in magma.
However, the studies of Nicholas Steno found sedimentary rock, which contains almost all fossils, to be widespread, and this indicated that the continents had all been underwater at some point.
Nature and Scripture agree in this, that all things were covered with water.
So sediments deposited by water hardened into sedimentary rock strata, containing the remains of millions of earlier life forms, suggests a later watery catastrophe and extinction level event, as the Bible describes in the Great Flood. However, the evidence has also been accumulating over the last 20 years that Genesis 1, verses 9 and 10 was also correct. The early earth was covered with an ocean of water, not molten magma. In 2002, U.S. News & World Report contained an article from a noted geologist who had concluded from years of study that the early Earth was 95% underwater for the first 80% of its history, before the continents appeared.
Call it the Great Unflood, a profound transformation of Earth a billion years ago that saw continents emerge from the sea for the first time, giving a start to the seasons. An eminent geologist, named Eldridge Morse, drew on years of work on ancient rocks, to argue that dry continents appeared suddenly, on a planet previously 95% underwater.
Oceanus, the journal of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, cited the work of one of their scientists that was also published in the October 2014 issue of Science.
Shows that Earth's water most likely accreted at the same time as the rock forming the planet. The planet formed as a wet planet, with water on the surface. The answer is that our oceans were always here.
And National Geographic cited that article, agreeing that the Earth formed as a wet planet with a lot of water on the surface from the beginning.
Our seas may have arrived much earlier on our planet than previously thought. The planet formed as a wet planet, with water on the surface. There was enough already here for life to have begun earlier than thought.
In 2018, Space.com published an article also asserting that a good deal of water was on the planet when it formed.
The water sloshing in Earth's oceans, and coursing through its canyons, may have been with the planet, since it first started taking shape, new research suggests.
And the story appeared again in 2020, describing the early Earth as an early water world 3.2 billion years ago. Now, both stories cannot be true. A superhot Earth covered with a sea of molten magma would instantly vaporize any water present, and a water ocean would quickly cool any hot magma. So there's only room for one kind of ocean on the early Earth at its beginning. And accumulating evidence agrees with Genesis 1 verses 9 and 10 that it was an ocean of water. The Nebular Hypothesis was useful because it contradicted the early water world of Genesis 1 verses 9 and 10. Lyell's uniformitarian geology was useful for contradicting the Genesis 7 and 8 flood, and provided the deep time foundational to Darwinism. Darwinism contradicted the Genesis account of the major groups of life forms appearing at about the same time, and humans as a special creation. Now, with evidence that the early Earth was covered with water rather than hot magma, and a renewed awareness of catastrophic events in Earth history, the foundations underlying Darwinism are showing some serious cracks. What do you suppose we will find if we look a little closer at Darwinism?